Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Institute of World Politics. I'm Patricia Schuker, alumni of IWP and founder of the Global Impact Discussion Series. For those of you who are new, IWP is the Graduate School of National Security and International Affairs. We have 5 master's programs, 18 certificates of study, and a new doctoral program. If you are interested in learning more about us, please feel free to speak to one of our staff at the conclusion of this event. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we are honored to have Mr. Christopher Andrew at IWP for a great discussion. Thank you to IWP and to Yale University Press for helping to organize this event. Before we start, I wanted to give a plug to the Global Impact Discussion Series, as we are actually celebrating our 2 years anniversary today. The Global Impact Discussion Series was designed to promote discussions between the government, private sector, and academia. A few logistics before we start. Mr. Andrew will be available for book signing after the event. We will also leave 20 minutes for Q&A at the end of his presentation. We will be on the record for Professor Andrew's presentation, and for Q&A and the discussion with one of our faculty will be off the record. So I appreciate if you turn off, if you're filming, to turn it off. Allow me to introduce Professor John Sano, former Deputy Director of the CIA Clandestine Service. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. Since I worked in the government, I'll speak in a monotone. If I were to go through the incredible resume of Professor Andrew, it would take up literally the bulk of our afternoon, so I'll keep it purposely short. Professor Andrew is Emeritus Professor of Modern and Contemporary History and former Chair of the Faculty of History at Cambridge University. For those of you who don't know, that's in England. He is also Chair of the British Intelligence Study Group, the founding co-editor of Intelligence and National Security. He's also a former visiting professor at Harvard University, the University of Toronto, and the Australian National University. In addition, he is a regular presenter on BBC Radio and TV, particularly on documentaries involving intelligence. His most recent book, prior to the one we are discussing today, was Defend the Realm, the Authorized History of MI5, which was a major international hit. Among his 15 previous books include The Sword and the Shield, The World Was Going Our Way, and other path-breaking studies on the use and occasionally the abuse of intelligence in modern history. His current book, The Secret World, A History of Intelligence, is the first global history of espionage ever written. So you're in for a particular treat this afternoon. So without further ado, I give you Professor. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your welcome. Only 3,500 years to get through, but I think I'm probably a better way to start. So this is, I think, the least remembered centenary this year. Fairly good reasons for not remembering it too much. But actually Russian intelligence, despite the different regimes which have been nominally in control of it, is the only major intelligence service that hasn't changed its headquarters for 100 years. So there we are. And what has been happening outside it this year is, I think, an extremely good sign. The regime doesn't want this to continue because this is the annual celebration of the victims of Stalin's and not simply Stalin's terror. So what you can just about see on the left with all the candles in front of it is a large block of granite, which was not founded by Stalin. It was founded by Lenin. That's where the Gulag begins, in this really rather beautiful place, which I've been fortunate to go to, Solovetsky Island on the White Sea. Now, what has happened since? I mean, it's curious. Putin is a deeply unwholesome individual, and how anybody could arrive at an opposite conclusion is very difficult for me to understand. Everybody has. I hope we may discuss that afterwards. But the different compartments to Putin's brain are so difficult for us to understand. They're often not mentioned at all. He is a baptized Christian. He is a devout member of the Orthodox Church, which does not mean that he's a good person. It just means what I've said. And he liked photographs taken like that. And as you see, he's smiling as it's taken. Furthermore, I've never seen this mentioned in any of the American media. The KGB, now the FSB, well, Foreign Intelligence, the SVR, has its own church. The CIA has never had its own church. It never will have its own church. No British intelligence agency will ever have its own church. But you can go there. It's just off Red Square on Sunday mornings. And you'll find the icons inside of St. George the Dragon Slayer, who happens to be the patron saint of the FSB. The icons were presented actually by, well, not by Putin, but by Patricia, which is pretty much the same thing. Now, again, just imagine a picture like that of Gina Haspel with the President of the United States at Westminster, at Washington Cathedral. Just not possible. So the convolutions in the pattern of relationships which link the regime to the church and to the KGB are really nothing like those that many people in the West spend time studying. And here's a book that's actually influenced me. It's not a good book, but it still influenced me. The book that is going to be mentioned already actually goes right back to the beginning. And if I could just quote the beginning, the first person of any significance in world history to emphasize the need for good intelligence was God. That's not a disrespectful comment, but it accurately summarizes his conversations with Moses, who didn't really get it. My history of American intelligence, how presidents have used intelligence, reasonably that only goes back to Washington, because he was the first president. But it was reading this book, or some of it, that made me realize how absurd I'd been in starting so late by other histories of intelligence. This is edited by Yevgeny Primakov, and Primakov was head, actually a Russian equivalent pretty much, of this institute, as well as being head for 5 years of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service after the end of the old regime. Now, it goes back to Ivan the Terrible, and I really don't think that there is any way of understanding contemporary or 20th century Russian intelligence without going back that far. So there he is. And Stalin commissioned one of the greatest films in Russian history, and I think that's a fair description of the two parts of Ivan the Terrible, in order to justify himself in the 20th century by showing, or trying to show, that Ivan the Terrible's terror was necessary to the survival of Russia. He sought to justify his own a number of centuries later. So, again, Stalin is so much written about that it tends to be forgotten how much of the source material is simply ignored because it just doesn't somehow fit with our understanding of Stalin. So there he was, at that age, probably the best-looking revolutionary in the world. And in Georgia, but what he began to generate was a huge Okhrana file. Now, the many books on Stalin virtually don't mention it. So this is how it begins. The Okhrana Tsarist Intelligence Service has a huge file on Stalin, and it's 125 volumes long. And as soon as, immediately after the revolution, Stalin took it into his own possession. There's never been, to my knowledge, and there may be somebody not to my knowledge, who spent as much of his subsequent life poring over his own file. So virtually every page has notes, notations, and then you see where he really stops and just gets stuck. I'll come on to that in a moment. And well, one of the things which undoubtedly strengthened his generally paranoid attitude towards the world was to see how much his private life had been followed. So this he sends to a friend's fiancée in 1912. I think there's no doubt that his first match was a love match, and that no match thereafter had anything to do with love. So he's promising her a hot kiss, because he says those are the only kind of kisses worth giving. And 34-year-old Stalin sending to somebody else's 16-year-old fiancée a photograph which actually would not have been allowed to be sent through the mail, either in the United States or in Britain. So the file is full of things like this, which really very, very different from any biography I've ever read. And this is one example of another thing in his file which really affected him. So there's Roman Malinowski, who was one of the very, very few Bolsheviks who was actually of working class origins. In fact, this is also a criminal, made him that much more credible so far as Lenin is concerned. In 1912, he's head of the Bolshevik Party, Bolshevik fraction in the Duma. He's Lenin, who's a bit slow on the uptake in all kinds of ways, asked him to investigate Tsarist secret police penetration of the Bolsheviks. And 6 months later, he comes back and says, I'm afraid we've concluded that there must be an Okhrana agent very close to the leadership of the Bolshevik Party. Absolutely right. The only thing he fails to mention is that it was him. but when Stalin discovered that, of course, that did not increase his by now non-existent trustfulness. Now, the linkages between the Tsarist period and not really the Soviet period, the post-Soviet period, are really remarkable. So, and I think, I can't think of a book that mentions, but anyway, the evidence is in my book, I don't regard it as controversial, that Russia under Tsar Nicholas II was actually the leader in SIGINT, the intelligence derived from the interception and, if necessary, the decryption of communications. And a link with between that period and the Stalin era, and actually a little beyond the Stalin period. What was his easiest target? Easy, the United States. Why? Because there was no such thing as embassy security. Except, so there we are, the George Mayer, US ambassador at St. Petersburg, capital of Russia, in 1905. I have discovered beyond a doubt that the Russian government has in their possession our entire cable code. Well, the State Department thought about this and took a then major decision. It would do nothing. And what one finds in Stalin's files, again, the books on Stalin don't mention that he was, no book on Churchill would mention that he was anything other than fabulously interested in SIGINT. I don't know of any book, although there is to be one by a former student of mine, that he was fabulously interested in SIGINT as well. And just like Nicholas II, he ticked off the ones he was particularly interested in. In his case, he had them put in his own private file. So eventually, when the United States, there's a period when the US Embassy was completely secure between 1918 and 1932, but that was only because the United States did not have an embassy in Russia during that period. So its first one during the Soviet era is 1933, and then the ambassador in 1936 discovers that it's bugged. And he writes the State Department to say, oh, really, really pleased to discover we're bugged, because it means they know what we're really on about and that we're really their friends. If the Soviets had a dictaphone, so much the better, the sooner they would find that we were friends, not enemies. And you can see by just looking at his expression that he is a diplomat with learning difficulties. The FBI were not called in the suite of the embassy until 1944, and I read the official records on this. And on day one, they discovered 120 hidden microphones. Now, of course, what is going on so far as Britain is concerned? Well, the fifth man, who was of the Philby and Friends Ring of Five, tends to get less publicity than the others. That's because he was less important, because he was the last one to be discovered. So there he is, John Cairncross, and he is the only Soviet agent to penetrate Bletchley Park. And I don't think there's any other area of politics or life in general in which such absurd films can be produced. You know, when films about presidents may make mistakes. I think a number of people here will have seen The Imitation Game, which includes Ken Cross and the greatest of all British codebreakers, Alan Turing. And what goes on is that Ken Cross blackmails Turing by saying, look, I won't tell them you're gay if you don't tell me I'm not a Soviet spy, that I'm a Soviet spy. It is that stupid. But all the time, they could have done a really, really interesting film. Because Ken Cross had a really very advanced interest in polygamy. And indeed, he's the only academic to have written a history of polygamy, which got a sensationally good review. Look, I'm very pleased with the reviews I've been getting. There's nothing in the same class as this one. So the review I'm about to show you is by Graham Greene, great English writer, also in British intelligence, and also ended up running the BBC. And here is the review, of which I'm deeply envious. Here at last is a book that will strongly appeal to all. So instead of making that silly film, they could have done a really interesting one about polygamy, but there we are. And now on to Putin. Well, one of the many other things that people don't grasp sufficiently about Putin is that he's really, really, really interested in the files of Russian foreign intelligence. Many glorious pages, bright examples of true heroism and courage in the history of the KGB. So here's just one example. And from time to time, when he produces it, he's having a joke at our expense. And this is a joke that he had at our expense. I don't think anybody noticed it at the time. So he suddenly announces that George Koval, who was an atom spy who had GRU-1, who had not really been identified in the West, he announces a few months after his death that he's making him posthumously hero of Russia. Now, what was his role? I mean, we had long known that the construction of the world's first atomic bomb, the American one, had been, all the details had been obtained, and that the first Russian one, exploded 4 years later in the Kazakhstan test site, had been an exact copy. But what we failed to take into account was that the atom spies that we knew about had not provided intelligence on the initiator. I don't know how to work an atomic initiator, but basically you're not going to get your bomb to go off unless you've got one. And this is what he provided. So there he is. Putin is more or less teetotal, but he's raising a champagne toast to Koval as hero of Russia. And the secret that he provided was the use of polonium-210 as the initiator. But the way that he was having one of his own wholesome jokes at our expense, was just a few months later, polonium-210 had been used to assassinate a defector in London. The defector was Alexander Litvinenko, and just as more recently in Salisbury, they spilled the stuff all over the place. And those are some of the places that they spilled it. And that's the man who's the target. And now we move on. It's not, the absolute center of Russian foreign policy and intelligence policy, but assassination is a part of it. And when the CIA makes a mistake, or Western intelligence and British intelligence makes a mistake, people say, oh, they bungled. But when the Russians bungle, people say, oh, aren't they clever? Because they've made us think they're bungling. Whereas all the time, spilling all this stuff all over London hotels and so on, it's really very, very clever, even though it's not immediately clear just why it would be clever. And the same thing's happened. So, this is, I think, the only picture of Stalin with his arm around another senior Soviet individual. And he's head of intelligence, where they really, really liked each other. And again, that's something which biographers of Stalin might pay more attention to. So how did he go about assassinating people? Well, for a number of years, they weren't really happy in operating on foreign territory. So the main targets were lured back to Russia. And this is the so-called SIS MI6 master spy who was lured back to Russia by a group claiming to be anti-Soviets who were actually KGB and shot in 1925. but the importance that has been attached to assassinating major opponents has really, I think, not been sufficiently taken into account. So I was amazed to get this picture out of, I wasn't the first one to do so. When Sidney Riley is shot, his body is placed in the sanatorium of the Lubyanka, and they have a drinks party. And that's pretty rare in the history of world assassinations. Now, again, just to make the point about the fact that an essential element, not always the dominant element, but an essential element in Russian foreign aggressive intelligence operations is bungling. Now, the least known fact, and it is a fact about Lenin, is that he was the victim of the first carjacking of any head of state, head of government. The evidence, by the way, isn't the slightest dispute. So there he is, and he's waiting for the Chekhov security man to arrive to go with him in his car when he makes a rare visit to his wife, who is on the outskirts of Moscow. But he fails to turn up, and so they head off in the car, and that's Lenin's car, but it's not Lenin driving. So at the outskirts of Moscow, they get stopped by bandits, and Lenin says, "Papers?" And the bandits say, "Comrade, we are bandits. Bandits don't have to have documents. Your Browning pistol, please. Your wallet, please. Oh, yes, in your car." And so they drive off, and it's not for another 6 months that even the car is recovered, and then, of course, the bandits are shot. And then it happens again. All the documents of this are available. I mean, if there was a sacred space in Russia in the early 1920s, it's Lenin's study. But once again, the Cheka, the future KGB, forget about the security rota to send anyone to look after it overnight. So it's completely vandalized, and the full 20-page document of the investigation, which follows, has survived, in which the investigators are ordered to work out which pieces of furniture were destroyed with axes and which were destroyed with chisels. So we don't, I think, really have to doubt the capacity for really incredible bungling in hostile operations. And so here are the two bunglers. They are, by the way, this is the most cheerful photograph of two assassins in the world history of assassins. And I define that. Apart from the fact they're obviously complete idiots, as well as being heroes of Russia. Putin has not become too choosy recently. They've obviously already administered the Novichok because there is could be a bit left, I suppose, in the bag. But anyway, they've had a really nice day out in Salisbury. And I mean, if you tried to, I am an exact contemporary of Monty Python. I used to write scripts like this, and John Cleese, and so on, and never in our wildest dreams would we have written a script like this. So there we are, explaining that, no, we're absolutely fascinated by the Salisbury Cathedral tire and couldn't rest until we saw it. Well, I don't know. That would never have made it through the cut. I was involved in satirical productions at Cambridge. Of course, these are the two people that after the scribbles. And not even bothering to conceal the speeding tickets. Well, you've already read that. So, intermittently running through the history of Soviet assassinations abroad, there is really mind-bending incompetence. But it has been even worse in the past, because it's been some years since this happened. From time to time, the assassins used to, very well trained in the old days, used actually to defect. And this man, Nikolai Khokhov, at a time when the main targets were Ukrainian emigre leaders, instead of assassinating Georgy Yanukovych, he gives a press conference with him, at which he produces, this may look sort of faintly dated, looks faintly dated because it's 50 years old, but cigarette packets which could kill from 20 feet were absolutely the state of the art in those days. So, now on to the first person to grasp the problem, Sherman Kent. I put him down as the founding father of CIA intelligence assessment, but actually, he's the first person who really grasps the nature of the problem. The problem is simply this, that those who do not understand past mistakes, as the platitude goes, but platitudes are true, otherwise they wouldn't become platitudes, and not going to progress until we know what the past experience was. Now, he grasped that, and he was really the first person to do so. So now I come on to my own experience. When I began many years ago a career in Cambridge, I was very fortunate to have living in my part of Cambridge a whole series of people who had been at Bletchley Park, a great code-breaking centre of the Second World War, and probably the most successful British intelligence agency ever. They were still there because they recruited when they were still students. The average age is younger than that of this audience. So they were around then. They were around to tell me. Two things struck me. First, what they knew. But then I think I may have been just about the first person to realise how staggering what they didn't know was. And what they didn't know was, it's now a tourist attraction, by the way, you can go and see it. They had no idea what their predecessors had done. So these people who produced Ultra, the breaking of the machine cipher, Hitler's most secret cipher, had no idea that the previous time we'd been threatened by invasion, which was by Napoleon, their predecessors had broken Napoleon's code. And there we are, it's in the British National Archives, that's his code which has been broken. The people who broke Napoleon's cipher had the slightest idea that the last time we were threatened with a really major invasion before that, which was Philip II of the Spanish Armada in 1588, we'd broken their ciphers as well. And Philip II's ciphers had broken by, well, the chief of Elizabeth I's intelligence service. It was Thomas Phillips, but it was a dyslexic family, and they spelled the name Philippes. And he once complains that it took him a week to break out one of the King of Spain's ciphers. So I think we may conclude that the others didn't take quite as long as that. Now, this will improve your summer, winter, autumn, or spring holidays. Where the first point at which the lead in intelligence passed to Europe was in Renaissance Venice, which is partly to do with the Renaissance and partly to do with Venice and partly to do with the combination of the two. This is the most beautiful intelligence headquarters in the history of intelligence headquarters. I can't say that the United States, it seems to me, has attached, even though the CIA headquarters is perfectly respectable. But anyone going to Fort Meade, for example, there we are. At the top of the building, you will find the first SIGINT agency in European history. And they had, of course, however, no idea that their greatest achievements had been achieved by Muslims over half a millennium before in the Baghdad House of Wisdom. There we are, not a very good portrait of the man who did it. But of course, as soon as the Ottomans took over Constantinople in 1450, codebreaking, what's all that? They threw it away. It wasn't rediscovered until 1987. So, meanwhile, SIGINT influences policymaking under Elizabeth I more than ever before. And to stay within time, I've got time to make one, I think, really important point. And there's this curious belief that codebreaking has been more important in the 20th and 21st centuries than it was in the 16th and 17th century. To form a rapid but scholarly judgment on that, complete nonsense. Elizabeth I paid far more attention to codebreaking, the detail of it, than any American president in the 19th and 20th centuries. So there she is, her intelligence chief, Wolsey knows who she is every day, and with whom she has a really wholesome relationship of a kind that's not possible in Russia. One of the first requirements for an intelligence chief is somebody who dares to tell truth to power. He dared to tell the truth to power, which is why from time to time, fortunately she didn't wear high-heeled shoes, she would take her slipper off, throw it at him, and very frequently score a direct hit. That is an ideal relationship. And as one of Margaret Thatcher's MI6 chiefs said, my job was to tell the Prime Minister what she did what I want to know. And we must hope that that tradition continues in the White House at the present time, but I'm not certain. I think I'll almost end at this point. I may be the first historian, I don't want to boast, yes I do, to see what can be done with royal dresses as a historical source. I mean, they're still one of the few things about Britain that make the front pages, as in the last two royal weddings, of a number of American media. So there's Queen Elizabeth I. Every portrait that she did, and this was done of her, had to meet her exact specification. So it's only a year before she dies, but as you can see, she's still 29 and 3/4. Look at the symbols on her dress. There are just two, eyes and ears. What does that mean? Don't even think about it, traitors. My boys, this was not an equal opportunity profession at the time, can see everything you do and hear everything you say. And thus it was at the beginning of the 17th century in France. There's Cardinal Richelieu, the only French cardinal to insist of having three of his faces on a single portrait. And on the right-hand side, his great codebreaker, Rossignol, which is French for both nightingale and skeleton key, so very appropriate. And he was given, but they were so proud of him, his own chateau, the Chateau de Juvisy, which you can still go to nowadays, although all the grounds have gone, and it's just the Hôtel de Ville. And when he was there, just to show how important he was, Louis XIII, Louis XIV paid him state visits. Now, let us compare that with the unfortunate experience of Fort Meade. So, the first American president ever to go to Fort Meade, headquarters of the secret agency, is Ronald Reagan in 1986. And at that point, I shall conclude. Thank you very much.